In the early days of the Clean Water Act, the NAAQS process as a whole probably worked because it required the collection of all health science related to the relevant pollution issues. But increasingly, the sheer volume of scientific data, often irrelevant data, involved has slowed the gears of the EPA regulatory process. As a result, the NAAQS review process is no longer managed by the agency but by the courts. To meet statutorily required deadlines, the EPA needed a new approach, and I think the reforms that have been announced by the EPA are going to bring us in that direction. Lead. The NAAQS staff paper on lead is an example of a document written by mid-level EPA staff without input from high-ranking officials. It is only one step, and sometimes unnecessary one, of the many steps in the NAAQS review process. I don't yet have a full enough understanding of this issue to have an informed opinion as to what direction EPA should take with its NAAQS standard for lead. The fact that we're discussing this today, however, is yet another example of why it's important that EPA reform the NAAQS process. And I think it's important to point out is what we're talking about now is this first step. This first step is a report, a preliminary report, that's my understanding has not been reviewed by the administration. The once in, always in. Perhaps no rule better exemplifies the inflexible command and control mechanism of than the once in, always in rule. The simple fact is we have much anecdotal evidence that suggests many plants would reduce their emissions of air pollution to avoid the expensive paperwork and other compliance costs of being treated as a major source. I commend Administrator Johnson for publishing a proposal that will collect vital information to examine whether indeed a little flexibility here in Washington can lead to a large pollution reductions in the rest of the country. Perchlorate and the UCMR. Another subject that we're going to discuss today is EPA's decision to not list perchlorate on its second unregulated contaminant monitoring report, or UCMR, and more broadly, the EPA's process for determining whether perchlorate should be regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Though the UCMR-1 EPA now has data related to perchlorate's occurrence in drinking water. Now the agency must gather better information on the relative source contribution from other sources, primarily food. Perchlorate is not only an industrial product vital to our nation's defense, industry, and space exploration, but also a naturally occurring substance. It is critical that EPA fully understand how much exposure comes from drinking water and how much comes from natural and other sources before we set out to creating an unfunded mandate on local drinking water systems. TRI, I would like to applaud the agency's recent efforts to reduce the compliance burden associated with the toxic release inventory, while at the same time giving reporters, and here we're talking about people who are reporting these releases, incentives to decrease their releases of toxins. EPA's revised TRI rule allows for certain reporters to use the shorter TRI form A instead of the longer form R. I appreciate the careful balance EPA has struck between burden reduction efforts and the agency's commitment to providing information to the public. And I'm very pleased that the Small Business Administration is here today, as well as a bona fide small business representative from Baltimore, Maryland, Mrs. Kleinfelter. I look forward to hearing from both of them about the burdens placed on small business by the TRI program and how EPA's form changes will ease those burdens. On libraries, nearly 4 years ago, the EPA began planning to modernize its library system, which has resulted in EPA consolidating its resources, making its information more accessible than before online, and saving $2 million in the process. The EPA has maintained 26 libraries located in Washington and at its regional offices, but the number of people walking into any of these libraries has steadily decreased. Let me provide some examples. The EPA reports that in Region 6 library in Dallas, 3 people walked in per month over the past 3 years. At Region 7 library in Denver, 20 people walked in during the 7-month period just last year. At Region 5 library in Chicago, most people who walked in were simply looking for directions. At the library here in Washington, the EPA's own employee use has dropped 71% over the past 2 years, and it's no wonder some of the libraries are closing. However, all information held at these closed libraries and other remaining libraries remains available to EPA employees and the public online. Through EPA's online library system, anyone can access information in EPA's library collections and either view documents online or request documents through the library loan with EPA from nearly 42,000 libraries in the United States and around the world. In other words, you can go to the Sacramento Library and get the same thing as if you were going to one of the libraries that allegedly is being closed. Not surprisingly, these changes have been met with some hysterical criticism. One of our witnesses today has written that EPA is now withholding life-saving information. The Director of Public Employees Group has even gone so far as to say that EPA's actions, quote, threaten to subtract from the sum total of human knowledge. I have discovered that these criticisms appear to be unfounded, and I'm glad the administrator is here to shed some further light on that. You know, I think this is the information age, and people are getting things. My grandkids are getting things online that I never dreamed possible, and so there are changes. And the whole library system has nothing to do with just the subject for today. Now,